Hello, Ticat fans! Back to do another recap of yet another game of the Hamilton Ticats defeating the Toronto Argonauts yesterday. Woo! That is 2 wins in a row for the Ticats, and this one, in some ways, feels better than the domination of the Toronto Argon or of the BC Lions last week, where I felt honestly kind of weird about the home and away with the Lions, because I felt like when we lost in BC, it was a case of us beating ourselves, specifically the June Jones punt call instead of a field goal, and I think we've gone over that. There's no need to go deeper into that. And then when BC came to Hamilton, it felt much more like the Ticats simply caught a team that was not playing very well. Jonathan Jennings had a down game. Realistically, in the second half, the Ticats weren't able to move the ball. It was a little disappointing not to see Dane Evans come into the game as well to get him some time in the pocket, which is something that actually dates back to the Ron Lancaster days and of not really playing the backup QB. It seems like a chronic problem in Hamilton. Not looking at the future, not looking at grooming a quarterback. Not that I think there's a tremendous age gap between Masoli and Evans, but I mean, if Masoli were to go down with injury, having that comfort that Dane Evans can run the offense would be a lot better than, say, if we go back in time, seeing Danny Mack go down and having Cody Ledbetter have to do the heavy lifting. Or if it goes really bad, I can remember the days when Matt Dunnigan and Anthony Calvillo were the 2 quarterbacks here, and they both went down with injury, and we had to go to Larry Justanis as a starter, bring Mike Kerrigan out of retirement, hire Marvin Graves, the consummate journeyman of the CFL, to handle the quarterbacking. And it was a bit of a disaster, although ironically still a playoff season because of how bad Ottawa was back in the day. And the fact that the Western Conference or Western Division had not really developed into a highlight reel dominant freak show that it is now. It was really just the 2 Albertan teams being very, very strong. Taking a swig of my beverage there. Pardon me, I'm a little dry mouthed. So let's focus on this game here. I think you have to look at it pretty well. I mean, 34-20 over the Argos. It's a pretty solid performance. We scored in every quarter, which I think is a big deal. Ticats have had difficulties, to say the least, with closing out games and developing strategies in the second half to counter adjustments by opposing teams. On offense, anyways. We did a good job of that here today, although the defense did kind of allow 10 points in the fourth quarter. It's not a huge deal. Ticats offensive machine, Jeremiah Masoli, 21 of 30 with a 70% completion rating. 2 interceptions is a little bit concerning, but he did throw 4 touchdowns, 338 yards. Again, a big weapon through the air was Brandon Banks, 8 catches, 178 yards, 1 touchdown. Luke Tasker was the only other one relevant in this regard, catching 4 passes for 63 yards and 3 touchdowns. Again, with all the injuries going on in the receiving core, and this is, I want to be clear here, this is not blaming the injuries, because you're seeing similar injuries with like Calgary, and they're just developing and plug and playing some people in there where things go down, but things don't go way down. The Ticats are really in a position where they need to develop some additional help with the receiving core. Justin Burren got involved in this game, caught 3 passes for 31 yards. Maybe that's a dawn. Maybe that's something can work. But as long as your other options are guys like Rashad Lawrence, Mike Jones, Felix Faubert-Lucier, this is not a receiving core that really strikes fear into anyone beyond Banks and Tasker, which is a problem. And again, to prove that, you had 12 completions of 21 to those 2 guys, and then 3 to Burn, John White out of the backfield, 2 to Mike Jones, 1 to Rashad Lawrence. There's no one really stepping up and filling that void. On the ground, John White had a passable game, 13 carries for 52 yards. Masoli did some scrambling as well. Got some things going. But yeah, it's really concerning while the injuries are here that the Ticats figure out a way to win with those injuries, because that's the mark of a great team, is a team that can take adversity and deliver. And they've done pretty well. Like, I want to be clear here, the Ticats have done very well. I mean, if we look up the schedule real quick here, that during these injuries, it's been very solid. Let's see here. Of course, the win here this week, the victory over BC last week, the win that should have been there against BC, a relatively competitive game that got away from us late with Calgary, pair of victories over Toronto, a victory over Edmonton. So it's not like we've been throwing the games away when we've been injured, but there are some definite warning signs within those victories and losses that say that these injuries are having a tremendous impact on us. But the big deal, I think, is that against BC, we were able to generate pressure against the quarterback. And the question was that just because Jonathan Jennings had no confidence and was kind of having a really bad day, that he wasn't executing crisply and it was allowing us to get to him? Well, we got to James Franklin here, who is not exactly a high-profile quarterback in terms of confidence here, but we did have 3 sacks: Julian Hauscher, Justin Capicotti, Nikita Whitlock. I think the pass rush has become a lot better now that Julian Hauscher is having a bigger role in the regard, and I do want to see a lot more of Nikita Whitlock inside because he is a force at rushing from the middle and allowing us to possibly get some sacks without having to compromise coverage schemes with blitzes, which has been a problem really all season long. And I think it will be continued because I don't think it's a coaching or an adaptation thing. I think we just lack what I would consider to be truly elite pass rushers, even though Justin Capicotti is a former All-Star. I think the combination of him, Adrian Tracy, Julian Hauscher, and Jamal Westerman just hasn't had it done. I mean, Westerman used to be an elite pass rusher, and people were trying to sell the Manziel trade as us getting an elite pass rusher, and I just kept saying no. The current Jamal Westerman is not an elite pass rusher, and again, that's why I was very disappointed with that trade. But let's not go down that door. We will talk about just the situation around us in the Eastern Conference, so we may talk about Manziel further. Speaking of the defense, let's give the full run. Larry Dean led the way with 8 tackles, had a fantastic game. Richard Leonard was involved. Don Unamba was involved. Kariel Brooks had an interception, had a pretty solid game in his own right. We got those sacks, like I said, so the defense delivered pretty well, though they did allow 20 points to James Franklin and 292 yards. But they did a great job of shutting down the Argo run game for the most part. Anytime that James Franklin is the leading rusher on the team, you know you've done a decent job. He carried the ball 7 times for 44 yards. Through the air, S.J. Green had a pretty big game, as did Amari Edwards. But that's kind of what my point here is. Like, you look at our current receiving core, and it's like it's Banks and then it's Tasker. You look at the Argos, who are a terrible team. S.J. Green, Amari Edwards, Jerron Carter, Declan Cross in the mix, a couple other people. And yes, they have not faced the significant injuries we have, but their ability to develop receivers over the years has been much better than ours, because I think realistic outside of Banks and Tasker and Jalen Saunders, there's not been a lot there. There's been a lot of guys who I thought could be that. I thought that Taquan Underwood would be a big deal. I thought that Terrence Tolliver would be a bigger deal than he's been. And I did also think that during his brief time with us, I thought DeMar Altman was a bigger deal with him, but we gave up on them and have not developed the ones that we have kept, like Tolliver, into legitimate threats. And that's a little bit of a concern in the long run, because you look at what Calgary has done, receiver after receiver after receiver. And I mean, you compare it to Calgary a lot, but Calgary has been the face of absolutely developing a team, a dynasty in this league over the last couple of years. And that's, unfortunately, that's the model you got to look at. It can be done, and we just have to be able to do that. So I thought the game was fairly solid. We continue on to do good things. We may end up in top spot in the Eastern Conference. We did claim a playoff spot with this now at 8-7. Ottawa's in the playoffs as well. Of course, this is because Montreal and Toronto are now 3-12 apiece. So that's definitely a thing. Montreal not playing this week. We, of course, beat Toronto. Big game today. Winnipeg smackdown on the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Riders still in the playoffs, though, 10-6. Winnipeg now occupying that third spot in the East at 9-7, ahead of the 7-7 BC Lions, who have 2 games in hand. They're playing Calgary tonight. You have to expect that that's a loss, the way the Lions have been playing lately. And Edmonton, the stunning thing here is that Edmonton has fallen to 7-8. They're playing Ottawa today, so we're big fans of them right now because we want them to pick up that win, put Ottawa back down with us, and put a lot of pressure on that home and away series that we have with the Ottawa Red Blacks. But what has happened in Edmonton lately? That's legitimately the question. Their inability to win games on the road is particularly bad. 2-6 on the road are the Edmonton Eskimos, which is the 3rd worst record on the road behind just BC and Toronto, which, by the way, has to be said, that emphasizes that win over BC not meaning as much as we probably would like it to mean. because of the 1-6 road record that the Lions have compiled over the course of the season. So what do we have left? Well, of course, next week, Friday, October 19th, we are taking on the Ottawa Redblacks. That is a big game. And then in week 20, we have the rematch in Hamilton on October 27th. I think by the end of those two games, I think you're looking at whether the Ticats are the top seed in the East. If they can take 2 wins there and move to 10-7, that would guarantee it. If they lose both, they're down. If they split it, it does come down to a last week showdown potentially. But you have to figure that, and you have to figure both of the teams are going to win their Week 21 meetings. Ottawa hosting Toronto, we're hosting Montreal. You got to feel good about those both being wins for both teams. So yeah, it really comes down to the home and away. And if Edmonton can do us a big favor in the game that's going on right now, defeating the Ottawa Redblacks would be a huge deal. And then the last points playoff position, of course, it's between Winnipeg, BC, and Edmonton. One of those will get a Western playoff spot. One of those will get an Eastern playoff spot because, of course, the Argos and the Alouettes, even if they were to win their 3 remaining games, would only end up at 6 wins, which is not enough to get into the playoffs. They are eliminated. Do the Ticats have a legitimate chance? Because a lot of the talk here has been, do the Ticats have a chance to go all the way? And I think we do. I really think we do, although it is hard to see it in that light because we're down Alex Green, we're down the receivers. And again, it's not an excuse of these injuries, but it is the point that we've also not been able to develop great success in getting replacements for those guys over the course of the season. We've done an okay job of developing receivers. We've done actually a pretty good job with Alex Green, introducing him to the CFL game. But of course, being a former NFL back, how much of that is us developing him and how much of that is just picking up a really good back that the NFL didn't really look at. And the problem is that with those problems, does this team have enough to do it? And we're going to learn a lot by the 2 Ottawa games. Not just in terms of position, but if we can come in and we can dominate and play really well next week and the week after against Ottawa, pick up those wins, I really like our chances at that point. That would get us home field advantage throughout the playoffs. That is something that is a big deal. You look at Hamilton, not so much this season. Hamilton's home record 4-3, away record 4-4. There's not a ton of difference there. Not a big deal. Not like, say, you look at, BC is, I guess, the classic example. This 6-1 at home, 1-6 on the road. Edmonton 5-2 at home, 2-6 on the road. So those are really the only 2 teams that have definitive roadblocks, but it has to be said that every team is better at home. Home field advantage is a thing. The only team that actually there are actually 2 teams in the league that exclude that. The Montreal Alouettes actually have a better record on the road, and it's an equal record for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, which is a bit weird because the Riders have historically always been a massive team in terms of home field advantage and hasn't really played out this season, so that's a big deal. That's why these next 2 games are key. We need to win those 2 games. Ticats. Could this be the year? I kind of doubt it because as much as I said we could be in the Grey Cup, because if we play really well against Ottawa these next 2 weeks, you have to say that opens up a huge door for us to be in the Grey Cup. I have to question how good our coaching has been in close games and against teams of equal composure. Because, yeah, we gave Calgary 2 pretty good fights. We thought the wins over Edmonton meant a lot, but we're seeing with Edmonton's late season struggles that it may not have been as big of a deal. Do we have what it takes to beat Calgary? Does anyone in this league have what it takes to beat Calgary to the Grey Cup? Calgary, they're a team that has stumbled, so they're not immortal, they're not invincible, but it's a really hard time to say it. But now that we got the playoff spot, gotta think about it. Can we make that run? Because the Ticats, it's been a long time since we lifted that Grey Cup. We've been a couple times. We've fallen short. Let's try and reverse that curse this season. And of course, a lot of people talk about the future. Is this June Jones' team in the future? Is he a long-term head coaching option? And I think the answer is no, but I think that the organization is preparing for that. I think that's what Orlando Steinauer is there to do. Is Steinauer the answer? I don't honestly know, because we have not really seen the proof in the pudding, so to speak, but he certainly has the resume that I'm very interested to see given a chance. Also, would this legitimately be the first time at least in my lifetime, that a Hamilton Ticat player has become the head coach of the team. Because, of course, June Jones not, Austin not. I went through the Lancaster years, went through a number of other head coaches. I don't believe they ever were. So that in itself is a bit of a special moment. So I'm looking forward to that. I don't know when that is, but one would think that June Jones is not looking at a tremendously long time in the role that he's in currently. I suppose we should touch on it because a tremendous part of the storyline the last couple of weeks has been Liam Mahiala, who, what can he do? He went 2 for 2 for field goals today. Or not today, yesterday. Did a good job. But it wasn't really hardcore tested in that regard. Here's hoping. Big game next week. I'll be back then. And until then, Oski Wee Wee, Oski Wawa, Holy Mackinac, Ticats, eat 'em raw!